to create smarter, cleaner, safer, and lighter products for the automotive industry and the future of transportation. Beyond the Connected Vehicle Conference. Produced by Advanced Mobility Project, how global trends are changing the way we travel. Supported by Magna, we drive innovation. Next Energy, ask us what's next. Infor, your work in motion. ITS 2014 World Congress, reinventing transportation in our connected world. Michigan Economic Development Corporation. Visit michiganbusiness.org for more information on why pure Michigan means business. EY, building a better working world. Bosch, invented for life. Nextech Power Systems, do more with your energy. And Detroit Public Television. And now, back to Beyond the Connected Vehicle Conference.
Sorry about the glitch there, folks. Welcome back from lunch. It's time for our first panel of the afternoon, apps in vehicles versus apps on smartphones. The moderator for this panel is Josh Diskin, who is business development for Detroit Labs. Josh manages projects, accounts, and contract negotiations involving apps for Detroit Labs. Josh's panelists are first John Ellis, Global Technologist and Head of the Ford Developer Program at Ford Motor Company. John oversees a team of developers and engineers responsible for creating the connected car. Also on the panel, Jeff Klaumann, head of Samsung Apps US. Jeff is responsible for product management, user experience, and distribution. Prior to Samsung, Jeff directed Sprint's mobile video strategy and products. Josh, over to you.
Thanks. I'd like to welcome everybody here to what I'm sure will be an awesome panel. Looking forward to hearing Jeff's perspective from the smartphone side, and John's perspective into the development of the connected car. As we discuss apps in vehicles versus apps in smartphones, we'll be touching on themes such as safety, security, and usability. And we'll be sharing our forward-thinking yet practical overall thoughts on apps in vehicles and apps in smartphones, and how they currently are and may converge in the future. We're going to begin with both John and Jeff sharing 5 to 7 minute intro presentations, and then continue on with a free-flowing conversation.
Good afternoon. How are you? My name is John Ellis. As was introduced, I'm with Ford Motor Company. I have a tagline. I'm a software guy. I'm not a car guy. I'm a software guy, and I work at Ford Motor. And this morning, or this afternoon, we're going to talk a little bit about what that means and where that story goes and sort of how that works through. But for those of you that don't know me, I have some introductions, but I don't know if we're going to get the slides. Are we going to get the slides or not? There we go. Not a car guy, software guy. So really quickly, I do want to do my forward-looking statements. This is me, myself, my statements. Nothing to do with necessarily there. If you don't ask any questions, we can't give you guys any answers. So feel free to tweet or whatever. We're watching a couple different channels like that. Last but not least, all the rights are reserved, but I'm sure there's some wrong ones there. So do let me know as you see them as we talk through this today. But really briefly and quickly, who am I? I use 6 statements that define me as a developer. And I wanted to share them quickly with you. Number 1 is, I'm never disrespectful, I'm always irreverent. I believe firmly in asking the 5 whys. Why are we doing it? Why are we doing it? Why are we doing it? Number 2 is, it just works. That's the motive. We need to design things that just work. It's all well and good to be automotive grade, but what does that really mean when it comes to software design and development? We understand that, we need to make sure that it always works. Before Siri, there was Sync. In the automotive space, we take great pride in being first, and guess what? We're being assaulted by the consumer space. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. Don't lose sight of the heritage of what we've developed, what we've delivered over time. Sync was first. We brought voice first into the car in 2007, and we should be proud of that as an industry at large. Don't tell me what I can't do. It's just going to get me mad and angry. I'm a developer. I'm a software guy. There are no boundaries to what I can and can't do. Go big or go home, and last but not least, code beats paper. In short, I'm a developer, and I welcome you to go take a look. You'll find my code, my commits. You'll find out where I'm at. You'll find out my transactions. Why is Ford hiring a developer like myself? It's an interesting story. The vehicle's becoming exceptionally complex, very, very complex over time. So let me level set some people here. In the late 70s, when we were developing the space shuttle, when it finally launched in the early 80s, 500,000 total lines of software code were on that device, on that machine. In the mid-90s, when the Boeing 777 came out, between 3 and 4 million lines of code total powered that beautiful beast. When we did the 2012 Ford Taurus, we had well over 50 million lines of software code. And in 2020, we're looking at well over 100 million lines of software code. The complexity of the car is getting more and more, and that complexity is driven by software. That's why they hire developers like me. But what's actually driving it? What's driving it is the ability to move from this simple push radio to all sorts of things, whether they're bring-in devices, Sirius, beamed-in, others, the fact that we have these devices that allow us to connect. So it's a phenomenal experience, and it's all driven by software. And we are beginning to recognize the complexity of that. So the car manufacturers acknowledging it and beginning to recognize that we are, in fact, in a software world. So how has Ford actually moved forward in this? A couple different things we've delivered, a little push for the company. First off is AppLink. It's our solution to what we have identified as the bring-in problem. And that is the devices were getting so complex. So in 2007, we created Sync. That was to address the device bring-in problem. Then we began recognizing that the devices were getting smarter and that there was applications that needed to be controlled. And that's what we introduced AppLink in 2010 and launched it in 2011. The idea being that we could now control and bring your devices and your applications into the vehicle experience and seamlessly connect them. We then began to continue to see competition, and we said, great. Developers like me came on board, and we said, we're going to start acting like a development company. So last year at CES, we introduced Developer Ford Comp, automotive industry's first open developer program. And we were very, very pleased with well over 7,000 people joining and working with us to try and develop and build into this automotive experience. But we recognize as developers that we're programmed by developers and for developers, and guess what? Us developers, we don't like fragmentation. We don't. We hate it. It's terrible. It costs us lots of money in terms of test. So Ford said, great, we recognize and acknowledge that problem, and we're going to address it like developers do. And so we took the entire collection of our software suite and we open sourced it. We put it out in the open. We contributed it. It's currently housed under the Geneva project. We are not Geneva members, but we're using the Geneva project to help us drive forward this message of a single solution with single source code base that allows for the connectivity solution to be managed by developers. We can evade reality, but we cannot evade the consequences of evading reality. Software is here. Software complexity in the car is coming. And the car itself is one of the largest consumer devices, powered by software. In short, Ford Motor Company is a software company, and we welcome anyone to come and code with us. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to give a bit of a perspective from the smartphone side of things and share a few data points and a little bit about me and kind of how this all fits in together, and then we'll have a really good discussion. So first off, I guess a little bit about me is I'm really a user guy, so I'm not a developer. I don't write code. I understand how it works, but I really look at things from the user perspective, and I am a car guy, so we'll have some interesting discussions between us. So, you know, I've been in this space for, I guess, about 10 years, but always focused on the product management and product marketing side of things. And you know, when I think about any of this stuff related to connected cars, I always think user first, because if we can get my mother to use it, my in-laws to use it, my wife to use it, then it's a success. Until that, it's just going to be the early adopters. So, a few things about the smartphone market. There's some information there if you'd like. All right, so I just want to provide some data points. So, real quickly on the smartphone market itself. So. We're looking at like 207 million devices just in the US will be sold by 2017. And to put that in context from a worldwide perspective, it'll be just over 2 billion in 2017. So I mean, it's huge, of course. And I understand that like connected vehicles will be somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 million, about the same sort of time frame. So obviously a lot of opportunity for us to connect different devices together. Also want to spend just briefly on the platform side of things. So obviously, you know, a lot has happened in the past. I mean, you think back to smartphone days or to the flip phone days and how how non-complex they were with Java phones to where we're at now. 1 million Android devices were shipped last year, so huge, huge base that's growing more and more. And obviously, as John mentioned, fragmentation. What this shows us is fragmentation, really, that the smartphone industry is dealing with, that the car industry will, of course, get to deal with as well. And then this is kind of putting my Sprint hat back on. This is an interesting one with respect to the data usage. We are at a tipping point where it is going to explode. You look at what users in the US were using last year, 1.3 gigabytes, and now we're talking in 2018, 8.8 gigabytes. So 6 times growth in 5 years is, that's unheard of. So certainly there's a lot of implications with that with respect to smartphones, but also on the connected car space. So we've talked a lot today about big data and how that impacts the connected car. Well, we're also going to have to be smart stewards to the wireless carriers if we're going to have good user experience. So that's important to consider as well. All right, so mobile apps. I'm a mobile app guy. So what do people use these smartphones for? Well, fun is the short answer. It's about 50% of it is fun. You notice you've got games at 32%, and 18% is Facebook, and then you have entertainment and other social. So fun. Probably not going to be all of the same experience when it comes to the connected car. You're going to see, I think, utility take a front seat, if you will. So we'll talk about that. And then this is an interesting shift. Mobile isn't just about apps, it's really about content and how content is consumed. And some of the things that are really interesting that are happening is how things that you wouldn't necessarily think are mobile first now. Like photo consumption is, over 90% of photos online are actually viewed on a mobile device rather than a laptop or a PC. Same, with maps, obviously, because we're using it all for navigation. But there's certain things that aren't used, on the mobile device as much, like things like health information and web portals. So we'll talk a little bit about that later as well. And then the last slide is just interesting about mobile app spending. So huge market, and it's growing. There's 3 basic business models. There's the free app, there's the freemium app that's free and you pay once you're in the app for different elements, tokens, something like that. And then, of course, the premium app. And there's a huge shift underway. It's, the paid app is dying, frankly. There's just the appetite isn't for paid content. It's freemium. So I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit. But, either way, there's a huge opportunity for the automotive space as well. Last thing, if you want to follow me on Twitter. But we will kick off discussions.
Thanks, Jeff. And thanks, John. I'll wait until you get here to sit down to kick off this conversation. So starting with a softball, but a nice intro question into talking about the different experiences, at least right now, between that users are having with apps in their smartphone and users are having right now in their apps in their cars. What are some of the biggest differences between those two experiences?
Well, I can kick off from the smartphone perspective. One thing is the relationship people have with their smartphone. It's probably the most personal relationship anybody has with something that's a physical good. It's very, very reserved. People don't like to share their phones. And it's really the phone. The phone is the difference. I mean, the movie, Her, that's coming out is probably about right on with the relationship people have with their phone. Maybe not in the conversation standpoint, but certainly that level of engagement. And it's not the same on other devices. Even on tablets, it's not the same. Like somewhere around 70% of parents share a tablet with their child, so it's a different experience. Take that into the car, and it's even a different experience. And you're going to have passengers, other drivers. You'll have children. You might have your boss in the car. Some level of understanding of that situation is going to be needed. You might not want, your boss to know that you're being stalked by a headhunter, or your wife that you're planning a surprise party for, or something like that. So those sort of things will be different.
Yeah, it is interesting. So previously I used to work at Motorola, so I'm actually also a handset guy. And we had done research and seen research where you would always, at least within the States, and then now it's extended to Europe and in Asia, your device is within 3 feet of you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And to your point, Jeff, right, it's a phone, so it's the way people call me, and it's very personal to me. Right. Where tablets are my email address or many number of email addresses, et cetera. And so we understand and acknowledge that the phone is exceptionally personal, which is why, from Ford's standpoint, the bring-in strategy was so important to us. It's like, we don't want to disintermediate that. We don't want to remove you from that. What we want to do, though, is let you use it extensively and safely. So the whole design pattern was, we see you driving while using your phone. So how do we solve that? Sync was the first solution, which was eyes on the road, hands on the wheel. We saw you still now using all these cool apps on top of it. How do we do that? App link, and then the movement in the industry for smart device link. And again, we're bullish on the entire approach because competition's coming. So somehow, some way, it's right. And I know over time we'll figure out and settle on where it ultimately is, but it's not going away. And so we look forward to trying to figure out how to always interact with that without breaking that very personal relationship.
You know, one thing on that, I actually remember seeing some data. I think HP did a study that 19 to 29-year-old, 91% of them sleep with their phone next to them, and that's twice as many as actually are sleeping with a partner. So that's, I mean, that gives you an idea.
That tells you why Pandora came up with the whole, hey, you can use Pandora now for an alarm clock, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
yeah, no,
it gives you an idea of how tight that relationship is.
It's amazing. It is. It
That sounds like the pitch for her right there.
Yeah, exactly.
He's an investor.
Producer.
So moving along, what types of apps, features, and functionality will have the biggest impact in the connected car?
So I think when I speak with the team at large, I kind of go back in time. History is a great teacher. And if we go back in time to 2005, there was no iPhone and there was no Android. There was all the different OEMs had their own flavor of UI and experience. And then, movement occurred, and it doesn't matter which one was first, but the iPhone and Android came in and sort of showed people that there was a new way to handle sort of that stuff. And suddenly we had developers saying, I want to work for there, I want to develop for there, but we didn't know how to do it. There was no mobile development. So what did they do is they repurposed existing applications that were on desktops, and they put them onto mobile devices. And they learned how to handle power moding and all that. They learned about the mobile environment over time. So today, we do develop for mobile first. We don't repurpose. Where we're at in cars right now is we're repurposing. We are repurposing the apps that you use outside of a car, and we're repurposing them into the car. And that's kind of phase one of what we're doing today. And there's a lot of good stuff going on there, right? Radio, music, news, stuff that we already understand. Some of the more exotic stuff is starting to come up, but we're starting to see questions. Developer forward comments starting to get questions. What if I did this? What if I could do this? What would happen here? So I think phase two is going to be the idea of building applications that, while delivered via this bring-in device, are truly automotive ground-up centric. So what might those look like? We could only dream, but it will do routing. It will take care of discovery possibly, right? The Google Glass concept of mapping. Wow, that's really cool. And if you tie that to a car, right? The idea of maybe hitting an explore button on Google Maps in a car as opposed to getting me closest to route, integrating. Fuel efficiency, obviously. Things that will make you drive faster, better, safer, while not necessarily, again, hands on the wheel, eyes on the road. At the end of the day, you're in a vehicle and you're driving. We can't forget that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of parallels to smartphone use, and like you mentioned, news and Pandora. I mean, that's probably the best example that there's been for something that's made that transition. Certainly, a lot of other things, even kind of the intersection of wearables along with smartphones. I mean, you think of health monitoring and how that might integrate with the vehicle, and maybe your health monitor starts to identify that you're going to have a stroke or a heart attack, and it alerts you on the car and makes you pull over. I mean, the ideas are endless, as John mentioned. But I also think that things like games, of course, games with 32% on smartphones, and that's just not a use case that's really applicable in the car, at least not in the front seat of the car. So I think it's going to move to more utility. You're going to see the discovery items, the contextual information, things like that will take take more of a front seat, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, so just kind of jumping on top of what Jeff just said, Ford's done a number of introductions over time with smart seats and the idea of sort of baby monitoring and diabetic monitoring. If you're, a child in the back seat, one of the use cases is that parents are always looking back instead of when they're driving. And so the idea is, we now see wearables coming into place. Great. We see wearables tied into applications which are on a mobile device. Great. You bring it in. How can the car become a proper receptor to that? How can the car, integrate into that and augment that data? Where is that marriage? And I think, like I said, we're in nascent times. It's very, very early days, and it's exciting because, again, we in the auto industry are being challenged. I mean, we're being asked questions that have never been asked before, or had been asked but always realized they must be solved in the car. And now it's the dimension of solution is much, much bigger than just the car. And so it's a good challenge, and it's a good problem for us to have, and we're looking forward to walking that path.
Sounds good. So as we veer in this conversation into talking about how apps on smartphones are going to be connected with the apps in vehicles and the different models associated with that. I know, being from Ford, you guys have your particular model into that, something that's exciting for a company like mine, a bunch of app developers. So can you maybe talk a little bit about how currently Ford and apps in vehicles or vehicles in general are trying to connect current apps that are on smartphones with the car?
So there's distinctively two types of collection periods. One's is the one more defined by API calls, and you do data integration and services integration, which is no video. And the app link and its like are part of that solution space. And then there's the newer models of thinking include this concept of projected mode or mode projection or video projection or shared projection. The idea that the screen on the head unit is driven then by the device. Both of them have design paradigms that reflect where they came from. The first one is reflective of the automotive industry thinking of safety first and trying to understand how to handle that. And the second paradigm is driven by the mobile device manufacturer saying, I've got content, richness, I'm also getting updated possibly every 18 months, so I want to come in and I want to be that central point and kind of use you then to integrate. They both have pros and cons, and they're both right now in the industry being discussed quite avidly. So how's that's going to play out? Ford's bullish. We don't necessarily want to choose a technology. I mean, we have a technology and we believe in it, but at the end of the day, we build cars and we want to sell cars that our customers are going to buy. So however that manifests itself, we're keeping, they're hiring more people like me. We're staying abreast of it. We're trying to, make sure that we stay out in front of it, because at the end of the day, that's what we're doing all this for, is to sell more cars.
Got it.
Yeah, I think from definitely great points as far as the different models, and just looking at it from a user perspective, I really see that I guess would be more of the integrated approach that where the smartphone is kind of powering, and certainly I'm a smartphone guy, so that probably isn't a surprise, but I think there's more to it just from the user perspective of the users just want the content that they have on their phone. Like kind of going back to that relationship we were talking about, the phone is kind of our center of our content lives and our digital interactions. So being able to extend that into the vehicle, I think, is what the user really wants to have happen. And then, of course, they just want it to work. Whether there's some form of industry standards and open source or some way that the user doesn't say, okay, I have to buy this OEM car and this phone for them to work together. I mean, that's a nightmare. Nobody will win in that scenario. So I think you're right. There has to find that right solution that delivers it for the user.
So with the Ford and your AppLink system right now integrating with, or relying, I don't want to say heavily, but relying on the sync and the voice functionality is really the basis of the user experience while you're in the car. I'm just curious, there's a ton of apps out there that are pretty complicated. They have a ton of menus, or items in their menus, tons of different user experiences. So how does Ford in the Ford AppLink system integrate with some of the more complicated apps out there on the market right now and seem to seamlessly bring in voice functionality to those complicated apps?
So voice isn't the only way to integrate with the apps. AppLink we basically, Nick introduced the concept of APIs this morning. So we take all of the things that are on the vehicle and we conceptualize them as services. So a button, and we make an API for it. So a developer can, when the button's touched, he knows that the developer has been touched. So, and voice is one of those services. what we try and accomplish with the developer is to explain how voice can be used. So if you go to the site, there's a very well done sort of story on how voice can be used. And we have a number of different developers who've come in with existing apps. Once they saw how they could do it, they completely reconceptualized their app, because if you've built an app without voice in mind, it does make it very difficult to add voice as a sort of flow, which is where I'm coming from back in the sort of when I made my earlier comments of repurposing. You know, if you're going to take an existing app, then there are sort of disadvantages to repurposing it into the environment. I get why people want to do it. It's fine. I understand it. But I think over time, the real richness that we're going to look, the richness that you and I think we know we can achieve, I think that comes from building it from the ground up, where voice, the idea that I'm in a vehicle, the idea that I'm shared with somebody whose mind is on the task of driving, that there's participants in the car, that the car's generating, you know, a significant amount of data. I mean, there's just all of that has a whole new idea of thinking. And again, we're nascent days.
No, I think that's exactly correct. That's going to, in a perfect world, a developer could develop once and use everywhere, and it's it's a fantasy land that doesn't exist. So if you find it, let me know.
So speaking about developers, where do you think the biggest opportunity is to app developers to target the connected vehicle market?
For me, contextual is where I think it all comes down to. You look at the things that are going on with your smartphone. If you have, Google Now or something like that, and you're getting updates that it's time to leave for your flight, or you're going to miss this meeting, or traffic's heavy today. I mean, that's just a tip of the iceberg compared to where it will be. And then I start to think about the automobile and how much more information will be there in the automobile. Are there 3 people in the car? Are there 2 people? Are there sensors in the seats so we know that the car is full? There's 5 people in it, and you have dinner on your calendar, and can it change the reservation? Can it do additional notification? You think of the temperature sensors and the speed sensors in the automobile, and all of the stuff that Rotify was mentioning with their bank of data. That's where I think the real pioneer effort will be for the connected car.
It is going to be contextual. It's going to be, the cars used to go from point A to point B. That's navigation. So anything in the navigation space is going to be a huge area for richness. And we keep seeing new stuff all the time anyway, so we know the space isn't completely solved. And again, there's 6+ billion people in the world. Each is going to have their own sort of unique factor. And so there's a lot of richness there. And then data and sensor interaction. For us, our guidance, when developers come to us, we were at CES, and they said, hey, we want to develop for the car. What do we do? I'm like, go to the developer program. Go to our developer program. Go to other people's developer programs. Ford wants us to be Ford first, but we want the industry to benefit. So go to other people's developer programs and see what's available and begin to visualize what's happening. Not having been a car guy and not being a car guy, I didn't appreciate the unique aspect of what it means to be in the auto space. And so it's hard for me to translate it in language to a developer. I'm like, it's just, dude, you got to go do it. You got to just experience it. And it's in doing that you're going to learn stuff. And I think over time, we on the car side, we're learning. We have an office in Silicon Valley. Others have an office. We're all learning. We're learning how to recreate, rethink. We're learning to understand that we have to change it. Once we sold it and ship it, that's not the same. That's no longer an acceptable experience for some of our customers. How do we handle that? All that's going to be rethought. So we're just as much rethinking. And trust me, we're going out to consumer developer sites. We're going out to consumer devices to see what they're doing. So it's an active conversation, and it's a fun one. It's a good space to be in.
It's a fantastic space, and it seems exciting. I'm putting on I'm not a developer, but I work alongside with a bunch of developers, so I'm putting on that hat for a second, and just I know already there's tons of excitement about developing and hacking on cars, and an extension from new platforms such as smartphones that have come out in the last 5 years or so. But what are some of the barriers of entries that you're seeing that are preventing right now developers from hopping into developing on cars? I know I said I put on my hat that was developer. Well, I'll put on the half going to law school, and I know that there's a fear of there's a fear of working on a program and the potential liability involved of bringing distractions that could cause lots of damage, like being on the road. So How do you overcome that barrier, and are there other barriers that you're seeing, and what are you doing to lessen those barriers?
Wow. Okay. So barriers to entry. I mean, first off, I think people have to understand, so Ford's approach is that you develop for the device, and you bring the device into the car, and we make available the device to connect into the vehicle. So what you're targeting is your customer with their device. Others are looking to actually have the developer develop directly for what they call the head unit, so actually release software onto the actual vehicle. Very different approaches and very stylistically different approaches. And then when you look at projected mode, even yet another different approach with respect to video projection. I think when I said we're all in nascent space, it's all of us, and I do mean all of us, and that includes regulators around the world. Everyone's learning about this. Everyone's assumptions about what the car could be or would be are being challenged. And so the conversation is a long one. It will be a long one. And I think that's probably one of the most frustrating aspects, because developers are used to being able to develop it, release it, it goes to a store, they're out in like 6 months, they're either validated or they're not validated. And with us in this space, it's a lot different. The model's a lot different. So I think expectation management is probably one of the biggest barriers. I point back, in 2005, once the iPhone got released in the 2007 timeframe, so in 2005 and 2006, there was a lot of Java developers, they were doing games and skins and ringtones. And in 2007, when the iPhone came out, and then right in 2008, when the store finally came out, suddenly everyone was a flutter. We're going to become mobile developers. It was very much a buzz. It's exactly what we see today. But it took a long time for people to finally realize what it meant to develop. And it finally got to be a very calm situation. 5 or 6 years. I don't know how long it's going to take here, but it will happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from that perspective, it's really how these kind of polar opposite mindsets start to work together with hardware versus software, and taking that idea that unlike the hardware industry or the selling of a car, the relationship doesn't end when you shake their hand and they drive off the lot. It actually just begins at that point. I mean, that's just the very beginning of this relationship of providing updates and continuing to enhance the experience and identifying things that maybe you thought didn't work, but now you're getting data back, and you make changes. And that change of mindset, I think, will be a real critical component to being successful.
Speaking about that continuous development, I mean, there's a certain mindset that exists in the startup community, filled with a bunch of our software developers. We like to pride ourselves on being lean, on bringing in some of the cooler new trends of project management, like agile, quick iterative development, getting software, quickly to the consumer's hands so that we can A/B test, bringing out our minimum viable product. Are you seeing some of these lean startup methodologies being brought in to some of the development and that's going on in the apps and vehicles?
There's two types of software development that occur for vehicles. Safety critical, so your brakes, powertrain, engine, motors, stop, and then there's the other more environmental, locks, which are part of safety, but the environmental body, and then obviously the infotainment. Each have very distinctly different approaches. Safety is very, very much very similar to any of your highly industrialized embedded development models, where you do real-time embedded deterministic. It has to work in a time frame that it's supposed to work with a deterministic outcome. And so there's models for that. There's ways to do that, and there's tools to do that. And those are being used. And then on the other side, we are trying to explore can we do more things with rapid modeling? Can we do more things with sort of rapid prototyping? Can we tie the rapid prototyping environment to the head unit environment to try and accelerate that? There's lots of explorations going on. Nothing's being lost in sight though of quality, right? At the end of the day, it has to work. It must be a quality job, and it must not fail. So.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Definitely, a lot of things like A/B testing, like you mentioned, I think there will be a time when that will make it into the vehicle, where you can start testing, is this a better experience, and do people use it longer versus this experience, and giving part of it to your base and trying different models. And Frankly, I mean, since, like you mentioned, we're all making assumptions here, so that thought as we go into it is going to be the thing that'll pay off. I mean, if we look at, kind of roll back 20 years to the web, I mean, A/B testing didn't exist in the web. A/B testing is a kind of a direct mail sort of idea that's made its way into technology. But I think with that mindset going into the development of the connected car, I think it will pay off.
That's great. So one of the panels last night, or the panel last night, ended off with a question on, what keeps you from sleeping at night? But it was brought in the context of a scary thing. And there's oftentimes I can't fall asleep at night because I'm so excited about the possibilities that are going on and the technology that we're working on, let's say in the office or whatnot. So what are some of the things that are keeping you awake at night, but that are the exciting, that I can't sleep because I can't wait to go in the morning, to go into work in the morning type stuff?
Why don't you go first? Yeah, why don't you go first?
For me, it's really the intersection of all of these different technologies. I think it was Nick this morning who mentioned that the user's in the middle, and there's been images that people show of the car and all of these things. No, the user's in the middle, and there's all these different aspects of our lives that are becoming digitized and becoming input areas. And I think that we can't even begin to imagine what that's going to be like. From a work perspective, from an improvement of life perspective, I just can't. I think it'll be outstanding what life is like from there. And then there are the things that keep me awake from the other side. And while I'm at Samsung, I was at Sprint where I was on the network side of things, and network is a finite resource, and all of this stuff that we're talking about uses data. So while I guess I'm happy I don't have to be responsible for network development at a carrier right now, I can tell you, going into this with the mindset of being diligent about how we use data, not all data is critical and time critical. So there's a time to upload data, and then there's also data that you can maintain on the vehicle, and at night when it's off-peak hours, you can put it up to the cloud or connect to the user's or driver's Wi-Fi network, and those sort of things. Physics are physics, so there's only so much of it to go around.
Yeah, so the exciting, I can't go to sleep because I want to solve the problem in the morning, not waking up type of thing, or not going to sleep type of thing, is probably most related to how do we handle the mindset shift that has to happen when we've shipped. In the past, we create a vehicle, we ship it, and then we're done with it. And that assumption was that the environment never changes, so it was built for a model where the environment was the driving conditions. Now we're going to layer in connectivity, and so suddenly we're going to expose the vehicle to whole new worlds that were never even in existence when we built the vehicle. And the vehicle has to still operate. And so it's an interesting problem, and it certainly challenges everything we do in terms of how we think of software, how we build it, how we support it, how do we handle, how do we take care of maintenance of the vehicle. I'm not a car guy, but I get the idea of preventative maintenance, and so the tagline for me as we go through in software is what's the preventative maintenance model? How are we going to handle, keeping our car fresh, i.e. we do it with oil? How do we do that with software over time, especially as we're adding more and more of connectivity, right? New things are coming up, and we're like, okay, great, the car can connect to it. So how do we handle it, right? It's both scary because it's like, holy cow, it's a big problem, but it's not so big as to not be insurmountable. It's a really cool problem to work on. From the other side, it's like, yeah, how do I get developers to know that Ford's got a developer program that we are actually open? How do you motivate people to start thinking about this? How do you get them to know about the car and the fact that there is this rich? I mean, we're in a pretty niche market here, but I go to people all the time and they're like, hey, I didn't even know you could do that. I mean, funny story. I was driving my wife's car, which is not a Ford, and I have my twin girls in the back seat, and I turn the radio on. It's the tail end of a Katy Perry song, Hear Me Roar, or whatever it is. And it's scary that I even know that. But anyways, it is that song. And my oldest, by a minute and a half, she's a twin, says, hey, Dad, can you hit the back button? I want to hear the rest of that song. I'm like, yeah, no, I can't do that. And they're like, no, Dad, it's the back button. I'm going, okay, no, I can't. I get you, but I can't. And Kira says, no, Dad, seriously. Open up Pandora, recreate the channel. It'll start it all over for you again. It's all good. I'm like, guys, it's not that I don't understand you. I can't. This is what's called a radio. You listen to what they tell you to listen to. About 30 seconds passes, and Kate says, well, that's stupid. And then like another 30 seconds passes, and Kira turns and says, oh, but don't worry, Dad does software, he'll fix it. And I was so proud. I'm like, that's exactly what we're gonna try and do. We're gonna try and fix it. Sadly, on that vehicle, I can't. But those are the kinds of things, like I get home and I'm excited. Like I don't live in Detroit, I live in Chicago. And so it's, like, when I drive home, I'm like, I got my mind going, I've got stuff written down, and I'm ready to come back for the next week. Because it's fascinating. It's fun. It's fun.
That's great. So what are your, let's end, maybe time for one more question about, okay. So what are some of your favorite apps out there in the market right now that are connecting the apps on the smartphone with the apps in the vehicle? I'll start off, one of the apps that I heard was, announced at CES was the Ford partnership with Domino's, where you can take the existing Domino's app that you have in your phone right now and order your favorite pizza while you're in the car. So instead of picking up the phone to call the store, you can quickly, seamlessly interface with the Ford Sync system and then order a pizza through that. What are some of your other favorites, or if you don't have one, maybe a wish that you have of one of your favorite smartphone apps that could connect to the car in the near future?
Well, first off, I'm going to give a shout out to Detroit Labs, because that app, which is your app, which is actually a very cool app, and we were really excited when we launched it, because it is really cool. And I think for me, it is that convenience factor, right? You guys came to us on behalf of Domino's and say, hey, we got this idea. And it kind of was like, wow, that's neat. Why hadn't we thought about that? Yeah. Well, it turns out we don't think about that.
We work on the Domino's delivery app, but we actually weren't connected with the Ford app.
Really?
Not to say that we aren't awesome, which we are, but that's in particular is independently awesome.
Really? Darn.
Yeah.
Okay, still a shout out to Detroit Labs, sorry. But it was a convenience factor. I think it's way cool, and it is so nice, because like when you're there, you just hit the button and it happens, right? So things like that, which would be like, or to the point, tie-in of these infinite, like to Targets, to Walgreens, to prescriptions, to things that I've gotten as I'm driving, geofencing, right? So tying in, I've got dry cleaning to be picked up and I can do this. Oh, by the way, my route actually gets built as an optimized fashion. So I know my start and my endpoints, but I don't necessarily know about the route's built. That's something cool, and I mean, that would be huge for me, because that's what I do right now. I mentally know what I need to do, and then I try and drive the route. It'd be really cool not to worry about that.
Well, I don't have a favorite at this time. I don't actually have a connected vehicle, but I do have a wish list. So last night, Rotify spoke, and Scott talked about his app, and it just brought up this use case that I seem to live, and I live in Dallas, and we can't deal with any sort of snowflakes or anything like that. So there are always delays when I travel. It seems like I delay, or gates change, and I can't tell you how many times I've parked in the, at the terminal I think I'm going to be leaving from, only to, look at my smartphone and see, okay, now I've got to go to A. So then I come out of that garage and go park in the other one. So the idea of having my car tell me as I'm headed down 121, your gate is not A now, it's over to C, and being able to do that without having to reach into my pocket and grab my phone, that's a dream come true for me.
With that, I'd like to wrap it up and thank both John and Jeff for coming here to Detroit, from Chicago and from Dallas, to come to speak at this awesome conference, and also to Next Energy for hosting this. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Beyond the Connected Vehicle Conference,